this tour of America, but we're very, very honored that that Chicago made it to your American tour, and that Anshe Shalom made it to your Chicago tour. So without further ado, really honored to invite you to teach Torah to our community tonight. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Wilkenfeld. And thank you all for coming out, indeed, on a cold Tuesday night. And I really appreciate the opportunity to be able to share with you a bit. I'm actually probably going to step around a little. I wanted to speak with you tonight about both Hanukkah and what we are currently reading in the Torah every week. So we're reading now about Yosef, of course, and Herman Wouk points out, interestingly, that the story of Yosef is the longest biographical treatment of anyone in the Torah, by far. So it's a huge amount that the Torah presents with regards to him. And what I wanted to do was kind of have a look at what I believe to be relationships between what it is that we're reading around Yosef and the Hanukkah story, and how it might apply to us in our lives. And so we'll begin with the fact that, or a question that, when I was growing up, and you can tell me what it was like for you, what it is like for you, but when I was growing up, and I learned about Hanukkah. I grew up in Los Angeles, went to a Jewish day school, modern Jewish day school. So I grew up hearing about Hanukkah. And when I was growing up, the way that I heard about Hanukkah was that the Greeks were a foreign enemy. They were trying to eradicate Jewish law, culture, and life, and impose their culture on the Jewish people. And that was the great enemy and the great problem. And, we as the Jews, we got up and we rebelled and we won this war, which was, the odds were against us, but we did it, and we made Hanukkah. And I think that that's a very, perhaps a simplistic way of looking at it. And what I'd like to look at tonight with you a bit is the suggestion that Greece is actually something much more dear to our hearts and close to our lives than that presentation suggests. And that, as a matter of fact, because Greece is so similar to us, and because they brought so much that was familiar to us, that was really the biggest problem. We had a huge issue with regards to differentiating between what it was that Greece was presenting and what it was we had, and how we were supposed to deal with that. I mean, it is essentially the first time in Jewish history and where we have these huge swaths of Jews that are genuinely ready to relinquish their whole allegiance and relationship to the Jewish people and become Greeks, right? To what we call Hellenized. And that's why I put for you on the sheets this one definition anyway, in the Merriam-Webster, in which it says, a Hellenist is a person living in Hellenistic times who has Greek in language, outlook, and way of life, but was not Greek in ancestry, especially a Hellenized Jew. So this was a significant problem. This is very different than what we are used to reading in the Bible, right? In the, let's say the Nevi'im, the prophets, and where we have these constant issues with people worshiping other gods. The worshiping of other gods for the majority of that time, and for the majority of the Israelites, was not to leave completely our experience and life as an Israelite nation and become amongst other nations. I'm sure that happened individually, but not on the scale that was going on during this time with regards to the Greeks. So we have this situation in which there is a huge confusion because the people are looking at Greek culture and Greek life as something that is a replacement, a sufficient replacement, a significant replacement for what it is that we're experiencing or what it is that we know with regards to our life. And there is only a small, group of the people, specifically the family of the high priest, of the Kohen Gadol, that believe that this is enough, and that we have to rebel, we have to launch this against them, and do something about it. This was not a Jewish rebellion. This was a sect or a small group of Jews that decided we have to be able to engage in some guerrilla warfare in order to be able to try and take care of this problem. This was not the Jewish people saying, enough is enough, we want our Judaism back. It was very realistically, as much as it was a conflict between the Jews and the Greeks, it was a conflict between Jews and Jews. It was internal. There was an identity crisis.
A civil war.
For all intents and purposes. Which really didn't end with the victory over the Greeks, right? I mean, this issue internally never went away. So what I'd like to do with you is to look at some of the sources that help me in my thought that Greece is very close to us. It is so close to us that it created a great deal of confusion, and that it was not easy for us to differentiate between what it was that they were presenting and what it was that we held, and how we were supposed to accommodate or deal with them. So some of the things that happen is, take a look at this halakha number 3, for example. This halakha from number 3 is written in the Rambam, but it's straight out of the Mishnah, really. And the Rambam says, "En kotvin tefillin umzuzah ela bichtav ashurit." We only write tefillin and mezuzot with the Ashuri font, which means that we use the modern block Hebrew lettering that we all know. That's called Ashuri. It's Assyrian. We use that lettering, only that lettering. And then he says, "V'hitiru basfarim lichtov af bivani bilvad." But they allowed for Sifrei Torah to be written in Greek. And this is not transliteration. This is Greek. The way that we know this is by the next line. Because the Rambam says, we don't do this today. And the reason why we don't do this today is because Kvar nishka Yevani min ha'olam v'nishtabesh be'avad. Because ancient Greek, we no longer know, it's gone, and so we don't use it anymore. The Greek that we know today, or at least in the Rambam's time, is not the Greek that they were talking about. We do know it today. We don't speak it today. It's not what's spoken, what's used. We do know it. But in the Rambam's time, he was saying, listen, we're not clear on what it is. We're not going to use it. So it's clear that this is not just Greek letters in Hebrew words. This is Greek. So that's a fascinating law. Because we have to understand what the implications of that law is. It's saying to me that this same Sefer Torah, that according to Jewish law, if you miss a point of a letter Yud on the Torah, it is not a kosher Sefer Torah, right? It doesn't have all of the holiness and the standing of a Sefer Torah, but you can write it in Greek and it's fine. So we have to understand what on earth. I mean, what would the simple implications of that be? I mean, we know that any time that you translate something, there's always going to be something lost in translation. Isn't that true? Anybody who speaks more than one language knows that. There are always going to be terms that you have one word for in one language that you need 10 words in another language or something of them to translate. So translations always are going to be discrepant. And what Chazal are saying over here is that Greek, this ancient Greek, was similar enough to the Hebrew language of the Torah that it represented the concepts and the points significantly. And you did not lose in translation anything of the Torah's value, meaning, and substance. It would have to mean that. Yes?
Are they talking there about the Greek language, or are they talking about transliteration using Greek script to do Hebrew words?
So I just mentioned that it cannot be talking about transliteration. And the reason why we know that is by the last line of the Rambam. Because the Rambam says we don't do this anymore today because the Greek language is not what it used to be. If the Greek language is not what it used to be, if it's only transliteration, then it's just letters. No, it's the language. Specifically the language. Which means that the Greek language was a significant translator of the Hebrew of the Torah. That's huge.
You had the Septuagint.
Yes, but here Chazal, the Septuagint wasn't sanctioned by Chazal, right? The Septuagint was by so okay. But here Chazal are saying, and that is good for a Sefer Torah, meaning you can write a Sefer Torah in the Greek language and it retains its full sanctity, which must, among other things, I'm simply looking at it very simply, right? It must mean that the Greek language is sufficient in its translation. It holds all that a Sefer Torah needs to hold. Yes?
What he said was
Septuagint.
Okay.
Okay.
I think in the Talmud they specifically say, I think, either Rabbi or Rabbi Shimon
Okay.
allowed to write the Bible in Greek because of the Targum HaShivim. So it's specifically Greek and it's specifically...
What does it mean because of Targum
We
HaShivim?
already had a translation that was made by 70 or 70 whatever rabbi, and there was exact enough that they said it's widespread enough now that because it was...
But it's not just...
rabbi,
Yes.
as opposed to just being widely used.
Very good. It's not just that it's widespread. The fact that the Hachamim did it, and the story that goes along with that is that they isolated them, and they all translated them in the same, right? So what that is saying essentially is that they recognize that the translation that these Hachamim did in this way was significant enough that it held the truth of Torah. It also says that when the Torah was translated, the world dropped into 3 days of darkness afterwards, right? So we have to understand this. So I'm simply suggesting, nothing more, that this translation is a significant and sufficient expression of Torah, that Chazal are saying that it's not lost in its translation enough. That's one. Two, there's another interesting thing. That's it. I'm recognizing that the room does warm. It gets warm. Two, in Masechet Sotah, a very interesting thing that Rabbi Yehuda Nasi says. He says, look, when you are in Eretz Yisrael, you should only speak two languages. Either speak Lashon HaKodesh or Lashon Yavanit, or Greek. Don't speak anything else. So that we have to recognize there's something about the relationship of languages, because what is language if not an expression of the way a people see the world? Words, the reason why you have one word for a concept in one language and not that in another language is because there is a particular way that things are seen, where one word simply recognizes a particular perspective on things that another people will not necessarily see the same way. So what it's saying is, if you're in Eretz Yisrael, speak one of those two languages. Those are the languages that are significant and helpful. Then there's this interesting thing that the Zohar says, which I think is also, it's just worth noting. There's a pasuk that says, "V'noga lo saviv," right? There's a dream that says that there is this sheen around it. And they say, what is the sheen around? And ultimately, the Zohar says there's a sheen around Israel. There's this light around them. It says, what is this? It says, Da'ihu Malchut Yavan. That is Greece. And why Greece? The Sahara lo noga, vela behu noga. There is this sheen around them, but it's not in them. Right? Which means that they exude some light, but they themselves are not light. Whatever, it's a bit cryptic in terms of what does the Zohar say. Because it says Saviv, it says surrounded. And then it says this, very interesting. It says, Dilet bechol malkevan. Let bechol malkevan is translated, En bechol hamalchuyot. There is not in all of the kingdoms, De'inun kirevin le'orach mehem nuta, that are close to faithfulness, like the Greeks. Kirevin is krovim, le'orach le'derech, mehem nuta ne'emanut. Right? That are not as close to faithfulness as the Greeks. Faithfulness to what? So I was talking about truth. Because if you think about it, right? I mean, it is the Greeks, although it's a question in terms of their time frame, but it is the Greeks who give us philosophy, who begin to look at and examine life, who turn in and question what a good life is, who question, the early Greeks anyway, like when you go back to Parmenides and Heraclitus, like the early philosophers, who are actually talking not only about what it is to live a proper life, like Socrates, but what it is to be, what the nature of being is. Later, much later, Heidegger, who was probably a Nazi, nonetheless, was a philosopher, an existential philosopher, who believed that the Greeks left the questions of existence way too early. He said already by Plato, they were done. But they're asking questions, regardless of where it is that you look. I mean, they are asking questions that we are still dealing with today. They are looking at a world not in terms of what they project onto it, but they are working very hard in terms of peeling away at the world to be able to understand what is really going on out there. They are working on approximating reality in a systematic way. And that's what the Zohar means. They're faithful. They're thinking. So now if you think about this, we the Jewish people, I mean, we have our own way of doing that. We had our own way of doing that. We certainly were living examined lives. We certainly were concerned about what the nature of reality was. And here we bump up against these people that are doing it, if not better than us, certainly on par. And they're doing it without a Torah. They're doing it with all the rules and the laws. That was very, very unsettling for us. It was not easy for us to deal with. And there was not easy or evident reasons why we should not do what they were doing. So, Greek culture, sport, and all of that, we have to talk about that because that's a big part of it. But that is not at the heart of Greek culture. At the height of Greek life is the philosopher, is the thinker. And of course, they have their scholars and then they have their regular laymen. But that was the nature of Greek society. So for us, it was profoundly confusing. And it was the first time we had ever seen anything like it. And so all of a sudden, there was this big effect, huge shift. And it caused us to question ourselves. This was not just going out to have some fun and come back home. This was us questioning ourselves really in terms of what are we and what do we value? So you mentioned Alexander, right? Alexander, I mean, he was pretty scary. I mean, well, look at this guy. I mean, he's a kid, and he's conquering the world. And he seems to be quite attractive, right? I mean, at least every depiction of him is such. He's spoken as that, right? He's this young, beautiful king that is conquering the world. Dies young, right? I mean, he's immortalized that way. So Greece, as part of their own philosophy, are very much concerned with beauty. They're concerned with very carefully measured beauty, the symmetry of things, the geometry of things. These, if you end up looking later on, right, at Plato, these paradigmatic, Platonic, as we call them now, ideals of how things are in their most perfect essence. This is what it is that Greece is thinking about. And that made us wonder, well, what do we think about those things? What do we think about beauty? What do we think about these physical elements of the world that Greece completely embraces and accepts as they are, on its own terms? How do we deal with those things? Well, that was not an easy question for us to answer, because what I would like to suggest is that this goes way back for us. It is a deep source of pain for us as a people. The questions of what beauty means to us, what physicality means to us, what integration with earthly things means to us, goes all the way back to Joseph and his brothers. and their father for that matter. Because there was this idea way back at the beginning that what we should be doing is integrating into the world. What we should be doing is celebrating beauty. What we should be doing is accepting the world on its own terms and bringing to it our thought, our spirituality, and our consciousness. How do I know that? Walk with me a bit. Jacob, Yaakov, our forefather. He spends 20 years in the house of Laban. He's got to meet up with his twin brother Esav. He deals with him. And we could unpack that more, but we don't have the time, right? So I'm going to fast forward. And he leaves Esav and he goes to Shechem. And it says, Vayavo Yaakov Shalem Ir Shechem. Yaakov arrives in Shechem whole, complete. What does he want to do there? Well, there's what's evident in the verses themselves, and there's evident, and also what we have what Chazal say. What's evident in the verses is that Jacob is very interested in integrating into society. He wants to become part of the people. There's an unfortunate situation that occurs in which his daughter is abducted. She is raped by the magistrate, right, by the head of the city. Shechem. Or Hamor, it's not Shechem. And, which is unfortunate, right? That's a very bad thing. And the brothers are appalled. They're appalled by this. And they say, we're going to treat our sister like a harlot? But it's weird, it's interesting, because Jacob doesn't seem as horrified. And the brothers come in and they decide to have a negotiation. And they say, we will integrate with you if you circumcise. And everybody accepts that they're going to circumcise. Which is what? What is circumcision? It's the symbol of our covenant. Right? So they're saying, if you accept the covenant, if you allow for yourself to engage and integrate, we will integrate with you. And they say, we'll marry, you'll marry our kids, we'll marry your kids, and all of that. And Yaakov is fine with this. They have other ideas. They are using the relationship factor, right, which is very central to us, which starts with Abraham, which is the ultimate symbol of relationship between us and God, to destroy these people. So they use that to destroy them. And when they actually end, they massacre the city. Right? They wipe out all of the men, they massacre the city. And what does Yaakov say to them after this? Interestingly, it's a very interesting choice of words. He says to them, Achartem oti, you've made me muddy and ugly. That's what he's worried about. You've made me look bad. But it's more than just you've made me look bad. You have made it so that I can no longer interact with anybody around. And that's why it says actually when they leave, God has to put in the security system for them. Some kind of divine security so that everybody's very afraid of engaging with them when they leave. Because everybody's like, we've got to take them out. When he comes into Shechem, it says, Vayihan et penei ha'ir, which literally means he encamped at the opening of the city. Chazal say something very interesting about that. They say he wanted to set up markets with them. Vayichan. Why Vayichan? Vayichan is also the word that we use for chen. Chen means charm, beauty, charisma, grace, all of these kinds of things, right? It also is the root of the word that we use in modern Hebrew for a store. Hanut. It's why Chazal say that there is no grace, no beauty, quite like the beauty of the marketplace. Right? Chen hashuk. There's something about merchandise being put out. Yeah, my family are retailers. So we've always been thinking about merchandising, right? How do you put out the merchandise? There's a chen to it. Yeah, you go out, maybe you walk by a produce stand, you have these beautiful fruits displayed beautifully, right? So there's a chen, right, of the marketplace. So Yaakov wanted to engage in markets with them, to engage in commerce with them, but it says it, Chazal pick up on that in terms of the word Vayichan. He was very concerned, and this is key, he was very concerned with interface. He was very concerned with not just the truth, not just being, not just existence, but how it was presented to us. He was interested in the interface. So that's why Steve Jobs, for example, was very insistent that they had to make the hardware for the software. You don't just make the software. Microsoft was happy just making software. You can put it in whatever box you want. As far as Jobs was concerned, the experience of beautiful software had to be beautiful. And if it wasn't, it was not worth it. And that was essentially Yaakov's belief. The software might be divine and spiritual and wonderful. The hardware needs to be the same. And that's why he wanted to be able to engage that way. It helps us to his kids, for the most part, were completely on Bill Gates' side. They were like, this is nuts, Dad. It's nuts. You're sitting here talking to these people about interface and so on and so forth. Forget this nonsense. Look at them. They're horrible. And what Yaakov was saying is you have to engage with them in a better way. We have to deal with them in a way that works. So they're barbarians, we will tame them. We will deal with them. We will bring to them what it is that we know and we have in ways that work. That was what it was that he thought. It wasn't that he was belittling his daughter. What he was saying was, we can engage in society and bring what is better in us to them. And what the kids thought was, no, we're going to circumcise them and destroy them. We're going to use what we have to kill them, not to make them better. Yaakov, one moment, Yaakov never leaves this. This is why, and it helps us to understand, when he's got one kid that believes, this guy gets me. And that's Joseph. He's got one kid who's, particularly good looking, we're told. He's a good looking kid. He's 17 years old. What his father does with him, he doesn't give him like, a gift certificate to the nearest Judaica shop. Or it doesn't buy him shas, right? What does he bring him? A new suit. So not only is he naturally handsome, right? He's encouraging the beautification. He gets him a ketonet pasim. And this, to the kid, to the brothers, is a disaster. Their dad's out. Their dad's lost it. He's encouraging the kid, and the kid's only going to get us into a tremendous amount of trouble. You got a question?
Yeah, I was curious. How does your reading of Jacob's interaction with the other nations, that he's looking for a greater facility with it? How does the fact that Jacob, the text specifically calls out Jacob for doing nothing until his son's return, after Dinah is raped?
For doing?
He does nothing.
Yes.
He's
passive.
Yes.
Yes.
He does nothing until his son's return. His son's return finds that he has done nothing, and then they act. So
Right.
how does that inaction play into your reading of him as looking for greater facility
Yeah.
in interacting with
Right.
nations as opposed to just
Yeah, it's a good question.
devaluing his daughter?
Good question. First of all, we don't really know the time that elapses until his sons get back, right? For me, I have no idea what's going on between the information that comes in, his sons get back, and so on. What I do see that he does is allow for them to orchestrate the negotiation. And I think that he does that because he has hope that what they're saying is real. And that's how he would want to do it. In other words, that's what he would like to do. And he cannot do that unless they're on board. In other words, there's no way that Yaakov is going to be able to come into this place as a family if his family is not on board. So when they come home, I don't know that they don't have dialogue with their father. It's just that told to me that they don't have dialogue with their father. It's very strange to think that they come home and all of a sudden are in a negotiating table. What he needs to know is that his family is on board with whatever it is that's going on. So he has to speak with them. There's no way for him to just go and what is he going to go and knock on the door and say, how dare you? He has to know why, because what he wants, as much as we might not agree with it, right? What he wants is to integrate. And he does not see, as distasteful as that may be to the reader, he does not see what happened to Dinah as a game, as a, deals are off. Why? Because he sees that what's being approached here, and this is an ancient world, right? We do have to take that into consideration. It's very important to take that, in my opinion. It's very important to not put our modern sense of morality, not that we've developed as people, on ancient stories, right, as though they should be played that way. However, what happens is that the father is now, Hamor and Shechem come to the father and they say, listen, we want to do everything that we possibly can to be able to integrate with you. So Yaakov is interested in that. His kids are not interested in that. They know that he's interested in that. And they know that if they try to fight it, he may fight them. So they are coming in and negotiating as he would have it. And then they take matters into their own hands. That's the way that I read it. That's the way that I understand it. I'm sure that there are other ways to read it, but for me, in terms of the arc of the story and how it is that I see him, that's how I see what he's doing. Yeah.
I was thinking that another example for you was the dream about the sheep and then the mating of the sheep to make them more beautiful, right? Where there's some kind of divine inspiration that gives him this dream, but it's all about the aesthetics.
What do they look like?
Yeah.
Yes.
And that's what.
Yes.
I mean, clever.
No, I appreciate that. Yes. So this to him is hugely important. But it's not that simply the beauty is important to him. He recognizes that this is the way that things need to be able to engage. And he encourages Yosef to do this. Now the reality is that Yosef is the only one who really actually does this. Because what he ends up doing is he becomes Egypt. He has no problems whatsoever dressing Egypt, speaking Egypt, doing everything that Egypt needs him to do. Not only that, the only reason he gets the job, I argue, is because he is able to present some element of beauty that Pharaoh recognizes immediately. Because Pharaoh should have made him the Secretary of Agriculture. He should not have made him viceroy. There's no reason whatsoever that he makes him viceroy to the point that he tells him, I'm going golfing, you're in charge. Which is basically what he tells him right there. He hasn't known him for more than 10 minutes. And you think, well, the guy's a lunatic. I think he was a brilliant leader. Because what he recognized was, what does Joseph tell him, right? Again, you're walking with me along. We're going to come back to Greece in a moment. This is just so that we can come back substantively, right? He says to Pharaoh, you're going to have 7 years of famine in which they are so bad, you will not remember the years of plenty. That's the skinny cows eating up the fat cows and not getting fatter, right? Which is very odd, because we all know that whenever we kind of come on hard times, difficult things, we're always in nostalgia. Remember the good old days. This is what we used to do. No, he's saying this is going to be so apocalyptic, right, that you will not remember that you ever had years of plenty. So Pharaoh realizes this is not just a catastrophe of agriculture. This is a catastrophe of identity. This is a catastrophe of who we are as a nation. We need something that we can rally around. So he looks at Yosef and he says, this kid is going to be able to stand in front of my people and say, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. He said, I want him in a convertible, and I want him driven all over the country. I want people to see him. And that's the text, right? Not the convertible part, but it's a chariot, a convertible chariot, right? I want him in a chariot. I want him driven all over the country. I want everybody to see him. I want him to be the face of Egypt. It's not just about the granaries and the storehouses and the food. Yes, that. But him, he needs to be seen. People need to rally around him. Pharaoh recognizes this immediately. And that's what gets him the job. So Yosef, of course, has all of the substance and meaning internally. But he also has the hardware and the interface that was necessary for people to plug in and buy in. And that's what we're about. What do the rest of the brothers think about this? They're having none of it. As a matter of fact, they never have any of it. Because even when they come down to Egypt, and even when all is revealed, and even when they know Joseph and they say, listen, we made a mistake, and so on, it's very subtle, but you have to read the story carefully. And we're reading it now, so pay close attention on Shabbat to the readings. When Yosef reveals himself in Vayigash in a couple weeks, and says, I'm Yosef, he starts hugging his brothers, says, come close. He hugs his brothers. He's crying on their shoulders. Are they crying? No. Look carefully. Sorry? Binyamin. That's a separate interaction. Him and Binyamin. The other brothers? None. Anybody who's not Rachel's kid, right? They're not crying. And not only are they not crying, there's a whole episode that's told. Yosef says, listen, Paro wants to see you. Imagine Paro. Paro's delight when he thinks there's 12 other Josephs that have come down to, this is phenomenal, right? I want to meet them. Yosef says, this is going to be a disaster. How am I supposed to do this? So he goes in and he actually has to prep them for this meeting. He says, look, Paro's going to call you. This is how it's going to go. He's going to ask you what you do for a living. Do not say that you are shepherds. Say that you are anshe mikneh. You are ranchers, right? You own sheep. Do not say that you... Don't suggest that you need to live in Eretz Goshen. I will take care of that. It will suggest itself. Just say that you have come to live here. Lashevet ba'aretz. Come say you lashevet ba'aretz. You got me? Yeah? Okay. He doesn't even bring everybody. It says he picks 5. And then it says, Vayatzegotam lifnei Paro. And he positions them, presents them before Paro. The modern word for play in Hebrew is atagah. Right? He's matzigotam. And right on cue, Paro asks them, Mama asecha, what do you do for a living? And they say, we're shepherds. And then they keep talking. Right? Not only say we're shepherds, it says, Vayomeru ro'im ro'etzon avadecha, Vayomer. And then they say again. Right? They keep talking. And they say, oh, by the way, we would like to live in Eretz Goshen. And we're Gerim. Gerim is not Toshavim. Right? We're just passing through. We're not interested in investing in your country. Or having anything to do with you. Paro does not even respond to them. Read the psukim, it's phenomenal. Paro doesn't respond. He turns to Yosef and he says, Achecha ba'u elecha. He says, your brothers have clearly come for you. They're not interested in doing anything for me. And then he says, if you happen to find in the family anybody that can help me out, please let me know. Literally, this is all in the psukim. So why do I say this to you? Because it's clear that the brothers never came on board with Yosef and Yaakov and their whole idea of how things should be. But this is Yosef. And why am I saying this? Because when Greece comes around and starts asking these questions, what does beauty mean to you? What does the physical nature of the world mean to you? It's aesthetic. What is this to you? We don't know what to answer because we've never really dealt with it on a fundamental level. And it's not until Hanuka that we begin to start to deal with this as a people, in which we fight Greece not because we want to eradicate them, but because we want our independence and we want to be able to be us, but we also remember something else. We learn something else. We learn that there is something in Greece that we do have to hold. It's not wiping them away. We incorporate Greece. We can write a Sefer Torah in their language. Their language is replete within our dialogue. You just have to study Talmud cursorily to be able to recognize that Greek words are peppered throughout. We do not eradicate Greece. We incorporate Greece. We assimilate Greece into us. in many ways. Consider the fact that of all of the mitzvot that we have, there is a concept of beautification. There is, right? There's a Gemara talks about Ze Eli ve'anvehu, right? This is my God, and I shall beautify him or make him splendid. And the Chachamim say that is doing mitzvot in beautiful ways. And they give examples of physical beauty. But there's only one mitzvah in which the beautification has been incorporated into the way that we actually all do it. And that is the lights of Hanukkah. Right? How does it go? It says that what is the mitzvah of Hanukkah, the minimal mitzvah, right? This is the basic mitzvah. One light. And you've done your job. Then the Gemara says, ha-mehader, ha-mehadrin. Mehadrin is hidur. Right? We talk about hidur mitzvah. Hidur is beautification. Ha-mehadrin, what do? They light one for each member of the family. Well, that's an interesting one. Mehadrin, mina mehadrin. The ones who beautify even further than that. Well, they light one for each member of the family and add one each night. At least as the Rambam learns. But I'm, a Rambam fan. So I don't know. These beautifications have become incorporated into the way that we all do the mitzvah. Because we recognize that is part of Hanukkah. That for us beauty is absolutely important. And that while it may not be everything, it is absolutely essential because that is the way that we have developed. We recognize it as an openness, as something that signals to us a possibility of connection. Can it go wrong? Absolutely. But we're willing to take the risk. But we're willing to take the risk if we know that we have what it is that Yosef has. And there's one more thing that Yosef has, and with this I will close. And if there are questions, I'm happy to answer any more questions. And that is that while Greece looked only in terms of physical, and even though they did ask, what is the good life? And how, that was later on, right? That wasn't during Hanukkah time. It took them some time to do that. But they do ask, what is the good life? In Greece, there was not this concept of inherent holiness. So for example, when it comes to Greece and the Greek games and sport and so on and so forth, there was no second place. I mean, if you came in second place, it was a disgrace. Yet you competed nonetheless. There was no such thing as being able to have, congratulations for a fight well fought or a job well done. It was either you won or not. There was no other opportunities. There were no other options for that. There was never in Greece this concept of it doesn't matter whether you win or lose, or it's just how you play the game. No, that's we did that. The Jews did that. Greeks didn't have that concept.
It's ethics.
Yeah. But it's not just ethics. It's a question of your expression of working towards something is in and of itself beautiful. Whereas as far as Greece was concerned, either you win and you achieve it, or you don't. There was no other option. And that's how they ran. That's how they ran. I find it very ironic that our sports teams are called the Maccabees, Maccabee Games, and it's fascinating. Right? But we recognize somehow, there's something that we've done to be able to contribute to that. What happened with Joseph was that he had a profound sense of innate value in himself. It's what gave him the ability to be able to get through slavery and prison and be completely faithful to who he was, through and through. And that only came from a profound sense of innate value of being. So his beauty was what he wore. It was what he put on in terms of being able to interact with the world. But the truest beauty for him, that was his very being. It didn't matter what it was that was going on the outside. And that's why he was able to put it on and take it off at will. He never worried, I'm going to become an Egyptian. If I wear the Egyptian clothes, if I speak the Egyptian language, if I have an Egyptian name, all of which he had. And then you'll say, well, don't Chazal say that the only reason that we came out of Egypt is because we didn't change any of those three things? We kept our clothes, we kept our names, we kept our language. And everybody thinks, well, that's the way to go. No, that's only the way to go when you are bankrupt internally. When you are a slave and beaten down and every last bit of light except for whatever spark there is left has been taken out of you. Well, then all you've got are the externals. That's not Yosef. And that's not Yaakov. And the problem with the Greeks and their beauty was that it was skin deep. For us, what we need to do, what Hanukkah ultimately teaches us, is that there is an internal strength and beauty that we all have. And that is the very fact of our being in existence. Because we do believe that we are creations of God, that we are in and of ourselves divine, that the power of our lives is the breath of God. That is our legacy. But how many of us really believe that? And I don't mean that theologically or philosophically. I mean that psychologically and emotionally, consciously. How many of us really think of ourselves as beings that are so special we could, for all intents and purposes, say, within me runs the breath of God? However it is that we understand that. That is the most important lesson of Hanukkah. And if that is so, how do you best communicate it to the world outside? How do you best engage with it in the world outside? So for Yosef, being Egyptian, he did everything faithfully. He served the Egyptian people honestly. He wore their clothes, spoke their language, bore their name. But internally, he was Yosef quintessentially, all and fully. And that's what allowed him to be able to do that. So for us, ultimately, Hanukkah is that issue, right? We don't reject the beauty of Greece. We incorporate it. But we incorporate it knowing that in our essence, no matter what it is that we look like, no matter what it is that we're wearing, no matter what is on the outside, the very nature of our being itself is precious and holy. So yes, second place is fine, third place is fine. What's important is the fact that I am living the best life that I know how to live, wherever it is that I am. And that's what shines in me. And that's a lesson that's not easy for us. We still struggle with it till today. But it is ultimately the legacy of Hanukkah and what it is that we have to deal with in terms of our existence and our being with regards to our sanctity and being in this world and understanding the nature of the aesthetics with it. Whereas, Yosef's brothers were more of the protect ourselves, don't change your name, don't change your clothes, don't change it. Just hold, because it's dangerous out there. And Yosef was saying, when you are internally strong, the externals are just interface. And yes, they are important in terms of that, but it doesn't affect what it is that I am in terms of my own value in life. So just some broad strokes to kind of consider as we're coming on to Hanukkah and having these readings, and kind of our minds are within these things. But very happy if there's any questions to see if we can talk on all of them. But I thank you very much for the time and the patience in listening to me. Thank you. Are there any questions? Any more, anyway? Yes?
I think one of the challenging parts of doing that is when there are also values that are attractive, not just aesthetics that are attractive. So what do you think, what does Hanukkah tell us, what does Joseph tell us, what do you think is the way that we can balance, like, when values are attractive, it's not just...
That's a great question. I appreciate you asking that question. The first thing that I will say to that is, values always should be seen, as I believe almost everything should be seen, within the broader context in which they are presented. Because all value will ultimately reside in context, right? In other words, there is nothing that is inherently valuable. There is only value in terms of the interrelationships that something has. It's how we define value. So, when we say that values are attractive, right, it suggests, in my mind, two things, right? It suggests, one, what I see out there is meaningful to me, and I do not find it internally. right? Because otherwise I would have it. I wouldn't need to be, right? And so what I would say is, it's important, first of all, to be able to know the framework of Jewish perspective and thought as broad as possible, right? So that we can recognize genuinely that what I'm seeing outside as a value, I do not find internal, that it's missing in us, yeah, genuinely so. And if that is the case, right, we have to be able to look at it and see, is there something in that that is worth incorporating? And that's not a no-no, right? I mean, all I'm saying, right, part of Greece is to be able to take Greece with us somehow, right? All of Galut is to be able to learn from where it is that we are and be able to incorporate it with us. The question is, though, are we incorporating elements of an external context into our context, or are we relinquishing our context, stepping into a foreign one? And that's what we have to be cautious about. We don't want to leave ours and step into a foreign context. It's a matter of measuring the value that I find attractive outside against my internal context. What that requires is a knowledge of the context. But yes, there is definitely possibility that that is something that we need to do. Yeah? In a broad sense. That was a great question. Thank you.
Thank you
Okay.
all for joining us. Oh, one more question.
One more. Yeah.
No, I'm going to, comically miss the point for the
That's okay.
sake of riding a personal hobby horse.
No worries.
I am a professional artist,
Yeah.
and one of the things that I find, is in great tension for me is, kind of the lack of, as it were, a unified Jewish aesthetic.
Mhm.
That we have, very much incorporated the aesthetics of the cultures in which we have been residing, and I find a real lack of, a philosophy of Jewish aesthetics, barring Stephen Schwarzschild's essay on it, which did not work for me at all.
Mhm.
So I was wondering if you have any, thoughts on that or recommended further reading.
Yeah. Well, I say two things to that. I think, first of all, because our people have been, for the last 2,000 years, exiled, there has been a serious breakdown in terms of a recognition of our own native aesthetics, right, and how it is we express that. So we do draw, right, from the world around us. And one might say, yeah, and I think that there is reason to consider this seriously, one might say that that is very much the Jewish nature, right, that we've been around, we are essentially the repository of the world. We're a treasury of the world. Everything that we've been through, I mean, we are the only people that have been everywhere. There's practically no place on this planet that we have not lived and been, no language we haven't spoken, that does not live within the psyche and collective conscious of our people. Where in the places that they began are completely dead. There are Babylonian terms, words, concepts that are still completely alive and well within our people, that are absolutely dead in the regions within which we pick them up. So that may be very well what it is that Israel holds, right? We become a repository, and we make it our own, and finds its life within our people. I don't think that is an invalid aesthetic. I don't think that is an invalid way of kind of approaching this. That's number one. Number two, I do think that there is philosophy of aesthetic within Torah, right? Within what is beauty and what does it mean? So certainly, I mean, if you look Kabbalistically, and they talk about the concept of tiferet, for example, as one of the elements of the Sfirot, right? These are one of the Sfirot. What the Sfirah is not just a dot in some kind of strange matrix. Every one of them has actual meaning. When I say chesed, gvura, tiferet, I'm talking about genuine concepts. And I'm not just talking about the concepts. I'm talking about their interrelationship with each other. So what is the relationship between tiferet, a word for beauty that we use, and the chesed, gvura antecedents of it? And what does it mean with regards to context, space, relationship, and so on, and how does we perceive beauty from those things? Those things are spoken about, yeah? But there are more concepts of beauty in broad terms, as opposed to how it is that I'm going to specifically exhibit or express the concept of beauty that I know as a Jewish person. So to me, again, this is just my response to the thing. I think for the last 2,000 years, the Jewish people have been a repository of the world's thought and commitment to aesthetic, and that it holds essentially in the strange immortality of our people. There is very much something about immortality when it comes to our people, and how it is that we bring together the various elements of aesthetic around the world into one people, and how it is that we make that one. That's in a broad sense how it is that I would approach it from that. Yeah, okay, put her up. Sorry, there's one more, yes.
I just have a quick question. It seems to me that there's a dichotomy here between assimilation and that sense of being a repository of the other. And so I'm struggling with how, or want to hear from you, how you balance, how you understand the one versus the other.
Yeah. It's interesting because the English word assimilation has two meanings. One is to dissipate, right? You assimilate into, and the other is to incorporate. You assimilate elements within. And what we want to do is the second rather than the first, because there is a certain question of maintaining a nature of personal identity, right? Who I am as opposed to who I am not. And what we are looking to do, what we hope to do, is to be able to have clarity or certain level of clarity as to who I am. And that goes to, any individual. It's a question of where are my borders? Where do I begin and where do I end? What is the scaffolding that essentially defines me? And if I have broad, at least, elements, right, in which I recognize it. And the truth of the matter is, I believe anyway, at least psychologically, these are some of the most difficult things that we do as human beings. Because we always have to ask ourselves, what is it that is mine and what is it that is other? What is it my responsibility and what is other responsibility? What do I own and what does somebody else have? Those are questions that are not evident to us. Those are questions that we really have to be able to have a strong sense of who I am. And sometimes we construct that, right? In other words, we recognize what are the patterns that recur in me, right? That I recognize as being me. And what is other. So it's essentially a question of knowing what is me and what is other, and what is it that I might like to draw into myself from outside, as opposed to, am I a chameleon, right, that just kind of moves with whatever it is that's around me. There does need to be a kind of pattern of self that I come to an awareness of that kind of holds on a certain level, that allows for me to be able to incorporate elements into it, to broaden the framework, but that there is nonetheless a framework of self. So, is there that in terms of the people of Israel? Well, we could say that Torah presents to us a framework of living, that it presents to us something that we cannot deny in terms of basic principles of what it is that we keep and have to deal with. So, if I use an example, you take the Ten Commandments, right? As an example, right? The Ten Commandments could be interpreted in any number of ways. But there's one thing that we cannot deny, and that is that there are 10 statements that we have to deal with, right? Honor your mother and father. We can't ever pretend that honoring parents is not something that we have to deal with. Whose mother? Whose father? Well, that's a question that needs interpretation. What's honor? That's a question that needs interpretation. But I can't deny that honor and mother and father are there, and that I have to deal with them and understand them. And I recognize that that is part of me, right? That is the nature of my people. My people look at that and think of that as a nationalistic identity. As much as an individual, I look at myself, I recognize, well, what are the parts of self that constantly recur in me? What are the feelings that I regularly have, the thoughts that I regularly have, the elements of self that come in and over again for me? And that's a work in progress, but there's something that I recognize as self as opposed to non-self. I'm not sure if I answered your question, right? But what I heard you asking was, how do I know the difference between what it is that I can take in and draw, and how do I not lose myself?
It's also a question of degree.
Yes.
And so I understand it on a personal kind of level, but it's maybe a question unanswered, but just something that seems to be on the flip side of what.
Yeah. Well, if you understand it on a personal level, right? So, my argument would be, I think that almost anything personal can be broadened into the aggregate, right? So that there is a meta-identity that emerges in a group of people, and that we would relate to it in similar fashion. I appreciate the question. Okay, yes?
Okay, thank you.
Good.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Rabbi Dweck. Thank you all. We have histories in the library, the books themselves. Please have something to read before you head home. And again, thank you all.
There's information on sheets if anyone wants.